Notice how this argument is arranged. It begins with evidence, which then all leads towards the claim. When we're writing our theme paragraphs, in our explanation, what are we always asking you to do? To connect it back to your thesis statement, which is exactly what Toulmin suggests, that to make a sound argument, everything always needs to come back to the claim, to what you are trying to argue. So this is Toulmin's theory. Notice what comes first. What do you need first in an argument? Evidence. Evidence is the data, facts, or evidence used to support and to prove the argument. Yes. Evidence is the data, facts, or evidence used to prove your argument. For instance, I could want to argue about the importance of octopus adoption awareness. However, I'm not going to find a lot of evidence about that. So it's really important that if you're going to argue something, that the evidence is there. For instance, you wouldn't claim that someone is guilty, then try to find evidence to prove it. You would look at all the data and then decide, based on what the evidence supports, a claim of guilt. This is exactly the process of a trial. If you're trying to argue if someone's guilty or not, you need the evidence before you can make the claim. Okay, next one. We make claims based on the evidence or the data that we find. So to claim. Okay, there we go. The claim, otherwise known as a thesis statement. How many of you have heard of thesis statements? Okay, most of you, that's good. And it informs the reader of the argument that you're trying to make. A claim, otherwise known as a thesis statement, informs the readers, or listeners, however, of the argument you are trying to make. Thesis statements can be found in any form of writing, persuasive, informative, explorative, but they're always making a claim about something. It's what the purpose and the point, subject of whatever you're trying to write or talk about is. Oh. So claims are written in a complex sentence and begin with a dependent marker. Does anyone remember what a dependent marker is? You kind of learned about it. Caitlin? It's an AWUGAS word. So it's written in a dependent clause. And that clause, that dependent clause, is a complex sentence. The dependent clause in the complex sentence should allude to the general counterclaim against your argument. And what I mean by that is, if I'm trying to argue that zoos are in fact inhumane towards animals, I would say, although many people find zoos enjoyable, they are in fact inhumane towards animals. So that would be, well, everyone enjoys zoos. However, they're not good for the animals. So that's me introducing the counterclaim, but making my argument very obvious. So it's always written in a complex sentence, beginning with a dependent marker, and it introduces your counterclaim. Next are warrants. A warrant is an explanation of why the evidence we use supports the claims we make. If you're thinking about something that we're pretty familiar with, which is icing a quote, The quote would be your evidence, and then that first E, which is explaining the quote, that would kind of be like your warrant. It's explaining, when you're using the ICEE, that part is to explain why that quote matters in relation to what you're trying to say about your theme. In this instance, a warrant is specific to the piece of data that you just introduced, and it's meant to explain why it connects to your claim. It's always bringing it back to the claim. So what makes warrants universally accepted? Backing. So you have your piece of evidence, your data, and then you have your warrant, which explains why your data connects to your claim. And then the backing supports, justifies, and gives reasoning to support the warrants. We'll go through this in a little more in depth in the activity we have next. But in relation, keeping it kind of back to prior knowledge, in that ICEing of quotes, that would be the second E, the elaboration. So if your warrant is connecting your data to that claim, then the backing is, why do we care about that warrant? Why is that warrant universally accepted? Why is it logical? It's justifying. Backing is used to elaborate the warrant and give it significance. Any questions so far? Okay. This will make a little more sense. We're going to go more in depth about this tomorrow as well. Just kind of an introduction to Toolman. So possible objections to the claim. What do we call these? Rebuttals. Rebuttals are possible objections, exceptions, or counter-arguments to the claim. So first you would introduce your counter-argument, and then you would give your rebuttal. Going back to that zoo example, many people can argue that zoos, in fact, help to slow the extinction of animals by inhabiting them in zoos. Then your rebuttal could be, even though it helps against extinction, the living conditions in which animals in zoos live is in fact worse off. Something along the lines of that. You're saying, and what is the purpose of a counterclaim?
To acknowledge like the other person's side of it.
Yes, to acknowledge the limits. Because someone could be skeptical. No, zoos are good for animals. And you're saying, yeah, a lot of people think that, but that in fact isn't really helpful to them at all. Yes. It gives you more evidence. Any other questions so far? So, a counter-argument is a reason why your claim is not universally accepted. However, if you acknowledge the counterclaim and rebut its reasoning, it provides solidarity to your argument. What do I mean by solidarity?
Like, it makes it whole.
Yes, it brings it all together. If you're acknowledging what other people might find skeptical in your argument, then it proves that you are in fact being as logical as possible. Arguments are not meant to be absolutes. What do I mean by absolutes?
Always right.
Always right. Like, there is gravity. There is gravity. I can't argue against gravity because it's just an absolute known fact. So when you're making your arguments, you're not trying to prove that everyone else is wrong and what you are saying is right, but you're just trying to get as close to the truth as possible. And that is Toulmin's theory of argumentation.